Hello and welcome back to another thrilling installment, second of three or four, of What Wednesdays. I'm your intrepid fellow traveler on the Whale Road, Fragath, and today we're continuing to read through uh, Beowulf, a new translation by Maria Dahvana Headley. So, last time we got through the popular part, which is the bit that you go through where Beowulf deals with Grendel. Um, Now we're dealing with the aftermath of that particular sequence of events. And this is where characterization makes some interesting shifts due to the way she translates. Um, I do not disagree with these characterizations. She has an explanation for them. I will read the forward slash introduction after everything is done to keep from spoiling certain things. Uh, I think I misplaced my bookmark. Ah, I did. Cool, cool. All right. Hopefully it will be a little easier for me to remember how to pronounce various Old English Dane names. Uh, Maybe it will, maybe it won't. We'll find out. I can actually fit them all in one screen that way. Okay. I don't think I have anything else intelligent to say. I don't know who drew this particular illustration, but it is presumably of Grendel's mother. So I figured it would be appropriate. So the previous couple lines were. Here we go. Night fell, and Hrothgar readied himself for rest, his quarters calling him to sleep. Men stood guard, as they always had. The floor that bristled with benches became a swan road, white waves of bolster and feathers, and though one of those drinkers turned dreamers was doomed, he didn't know it. And now we kick into gear for our next major chunk, and I will be covering up until just before the dragon incident, which is actually a fair chunk. A lot of it is digression. Just bear with it. The Geats' shields served as shining headboards, and on each was arranged a helmet, hulking, a mail shirt with rings like linked fingers, and a splinterless spear, tree sleek, ready for wrath any time, to be brought into play without notice, as was the habit of their homeland and war wanderings. They were ready to wreak havoc any time, any place. Their lord was a lucky lord. The Geats were hardcore, but even the Geats need sleep, so sleep swept them away. One dreamer would die dreaming. This was nothing new, given Grendel's former residence in the Golden Hall, but his eviction had made evil dwindle in the minds of the defenders. That story, they thought, was over. There was another chapter. An avenger lay in wait, counting sordid seconds until the latest hour, her heart full of hatred. Grendel's mother, warrior woman, outlaw, meditated on misery. She lived ill-fated, sinking beneath cold currents to her kingdom under country, her line linked to extinction since Cain crossed swords with Abel and fled, murder marked, to make his home in wastelands, solitary and silent. From Cain came more misery, a legacy of lost souls. Grendel was one of those, banished and blasted. He'd found a waker among the dreamers, a battle amid the beds, and wrestled the warrior who'd woken into war. Beowulf saw himself as God's gift, Grendel as a goner. He used his strength to slay the intruder, trusting in his father to protect him, as he always had. He bled the Hellion, and Grendel fled piecemeal, no heaven for him, no honey, only rushing through a haunted hall to die in his own mausoleum. Now his mother was here, carried on a wave of wrath, crazed with sorrow, looking for someone to slay, someone to pay in pain for her heart's loss. She found the path and made her way to HWÆT. Ringdanes were dreaming there, a murdering herd of sleepers, drooling, drunk, their feast filling them. They were the cream of the crop, but soon they'd be chaff, scythed from swordsmen into skeletons. She was the one to do it. The horror wasn't muted by the measure of women's strength against men's brawn. Both can hold slaying swords, glazed with gore, and score the boar crests from war helmets, warming them with blood. In HWÆT Hall, hard-honed blades were yanked from over benches, shields shouldered to cover blinking sleepers, waking bare-headed, bare-chested, stunned by her arrival. She moved swiftly, knowing she had only moments to sift men for her vengeance and remain among the living. She tore a warrior from his bed and dragged him defenseless to her fen. This was Hrothgar's best friend, most adored on the land between the two salt seas, warrior and retainer. She slew him sleeping. Beowulf was lucky, bedded elsewhere. After the brawl, gift quarters had been appointed him like rings. The Geat was asleep when Grendel's mother struck. HWÆT Hall howled. She'd taken their trophy, too, Grendel's hand. Man by man they squalled. This was unjust, a bad bargain that both sides should suffer losses, though the war was dealt and done, themselves the clear winners. The wise king, grey and battle-brittle, moaned when he knew the news that his closest adviser, nearest to ear, was no more, Doornail dead. Beowulf, blood-blessed boy, was hauled from sleep, hustled hangover to the king's bedside. Boot to boot with his band, he marched to the room where Hrothgar waited, grim and gloomy, wondering if his fate was fucked forever, the Almighty refusing to relent. Beowulf and his boys threw the doors open to sunlight and rattled the floorboards, no ground given to grief. Beowulf thundered up to the morose prince and asked, had Hrothgar slept well? Hrothgar had no words. He said some anyway. Don't speak to me of happiness. Hard times have come again. The Danes are in darkness. Ashera is murdered. Oh gosh, what is this one? I do not have one for this one. I'm going to guess it's Irmanlaf. Irmanlaf's big brother and my best friend. My battle bro when ranks were closing and boar helms bashed into brain pans. He was there, hand to my heart, a man like no other, terror tested, never bested, until tonight, when a slaughterer withdrew him and spirited him from HWÆT. Where is she? Who knows? Glutting on gobbets after murdering him unopposed. This is on you. She threw herself into a blood feud after you slew her son, Grendel, last night, tore him and bore him into the afterlife, never mind years of his own crimes. You gripped him, held him, and he lost the fight, fell to the mat, and died. He's followed by another now, an evil intruder, his mother, fueled by fury, a woman seeking vengeance for her son. She goes too far, even as a soldier might in avenging his king, grieving the loss of his ring-giver. That hand which once stretched wide, filled with golden gifts, now still and cold. Well, I've heard my people, those simple citizens who live out in the muddy country, say they've seen these two together, roaming the moor, wading the mere, heath rambling, and of a height. One is, as far as they can tell, a woman, and the other, misshapen, formed like a man, but larger than any man has a right to be. He was named Grendel, a fatherless son. Who knows whether he had other kin? He was a sin walker, is all they said, those who've talked to me of these things. They say the two stalked the hillsides, the concealed country. They denned with wolves and dove in windy rivers, slipped like mist-fish into the fen and through it, down into the darkest places under water and underground, cliff-bound. It's not far from here, the mere, but it's a world away, a forest frosted even in green months, old wood wicked and well-rooted. Water reflects trees like tangled teeth, a gaping maw that, at night, is lit with flames in the flood. No one's ever touched the bottom. No one born of man, anyway. Men can't go in. Even animals, a heath-hopping hart, held to Mere's edge by hounds, would sooner spin on hooves and fight, lower horns, and ready itself for death, than step upon that stinking sod and dive into the dark. That is a bad place. Waves roil and taste the sky's edge. Winds gust, clouds spit and spark, and when it storms, Mere mixes with mist, geysers up, and heaven moans. I'll say it again. This is on you. Everything depends on a boy who knows nothing of this terror, not least what you might fear when you get there, the nerves that might make you quake in horror's homestead. Go in, if you dare. I'll pay in gold, old and new, heirlooms and holdings lately wrought, if only you return having done it. Beowulf, son of Ecgtheow, was open for business. "No worries, wise one, I've got this. When a friend needs to be avenged, it's better to fight than cry. Even when mourning, this is how it goes. We're all going to die, but most of us won't go out in glory. Here's what matters, though, for men. Not living, but living on in legend. I'm not afraid. Stand up, protector of this place, and let us go together, following Grendel's mother's tracks. I give you my fist. She won't get away from Beowulf. There's no asylum, no cleavage cracks in Mother Earth, no tree barrow, no ocean I can't find her in, wherever she hides. Live through today, Hrothgar. It's the end of your miseries. Be as brave as your scops say you are." The old king stood and thanked God, mighty as ever, for the promises of this prince. A horse was bridled for Hrothgar, its mane knitted into war braids, and the wise one, master of many, mounted his sparkling steed, his status visible for miles. His army followed on foot, shields raised, pacing murderers' tracks, leaving their own uncovered. They had no need to hide their hunting from her. She'd gone overland, straight through the dark, carrying the corpse of the comrade she'd killed, best beloved, right-hand man, second set of eyes for Hrothgar. The descendants of chieftains rode over razor-edged rocks, through perilous passageways, places off-map, paths too slender for company, where sea monsters sang and cliffs called for suicides. Hrothgar took the front, his crew behind him, examining her tracks, unhappily imagining the path ahead. Finally, the trees leaned longingly toward the stones, their needles bending as if to break, a grove of ghost. There was the mere, water welling up like something wound wrung, red as blood. Though they'd known their man was dead, they suffered afresh to discover in the mere a dark gift. There, at cliff's edge, lay Eschera's head. The company stared as water boiled with blood and bones. A war horn sounded, over and over, but the soldiers sagged and sat down. The mere was full of monsters, too many to mention. Serpentine salt dragons, lizards in lethargy, lying on stones. The kinds of creatures that surface seething in ships' wakes to bare teeth and twist about an oar, foil fishers and bring bad omens to sailors. The beasts dove, furious and frightened at the noise, the bugle and battlers' shouts, the shrillness of seekers in their secret space. A HWÆT drew his bow and struck a slithering one. An arrow piercing its scales, it struggled and thrashed in the water. The other men, invigorated, sought to join the killing. A second shot, a third, then they slung themselves into the shallows and speared it. This monster they could control. They cornered it, clubbed it, tugged it onto the rocks, stillbirthed it from its mere mother, deemed it damned, and made of it a miscarriage. They examined its entrails, awed and aggrieved. Meanwhile, Beowulf gave 0 shits. He dressed himself in glittering gear, his mail shirt finely forged, links locked and loaded. He'd meet this murdering mother under mere and amend her existence. Even if she tried to smother him, his bone cage would stay intact. No weakness here. His helmet, bright against the bleak backdrop, would save his skull from the watery substrate, from the black mud and curious currents. Hammered gold for a glamour god, made by one long gone, jewels and boar-shaped ornaments, imbued by the smith with power to keep other men from dying. No battle teeth could test it, no sword slice that shine. Gold is good. Oh, Scop is pronounced Shope. I'm silly. I'm sorry. I've said that about 6 times and been wrong the entire time. Last but not least, Unferth, Hrothgar's left-hand man, unexpectedly stand for Beowulf, and handed him his heirloom, Hrunting, an ancient hilted sword. I just lost my place. I'm sorry. We'll take that from the top. Last but not least, Unferth, Hrothgar's left-hand man, unexpectedly stand for Beowulf, and handed him his heirloom, Hrunting, an ancient hilted sword, written with runes of ruin, iron blade emblazoned with poison shoots, each bud reddened with enemy blood. In war it never failed to score flesh, had never been wrested from the fist of him who held it. It was a sublime soldier's sword, meant to limn enemies, and this wasn't the first time it urged a hero to perform a feat. Unferth sent his sword to the more skilful swordsman. Note: the stone-bold son of Ecglaf had been blackout drunk when he'd said that stuff he'd said, the rant he'd decanted into Beowulf's ear. He wasn't man enough to dive into rotten depths seeking someone so savage. He'd forgotten it now. He sought not to risk his skin, so surrendered his chance at fame. Why sign up for endless night when another man is armored, able, and ready to fight? Beowulf, Ecgtheow's son, laid out his plan. "My man, king of wisdom, ring bringer, I'm about to dive deep. Keep those keep those words in mind, the pledge we exchanged, that dearly done deal. To recap, you, Halfdane's son, said that I'm your son now, adopted and owned, that if I died in this dive, you'd father me to a further shore. In short, I end up dead, you pay my core, feed them, pour them mead. Also, adored Hrothgar, you swore you'd send... Oh no. Oh no, cramp! My cramp! Why? Also, adored Hrothgar, you swore you'd send Hygelac my gold get, array for my Geat lord, the treasures I won, and show him what keys this kingdom's deeded me. What a generous giver you are, what a son I was to you while I lived. And Unverth, to that soldier I bequeath my father-forged heirloom, my wave-winging war-blade. I'll gain fame with his hrunting, or be harvested by hell. The Prince of Weather Geats was done standing on ceremony. He stepped to the mere's edge, and dove like a stone, thrown not to skip, but to wait a ship-shrouded corpse. Darkness drew him down. Most of a day was done before you could see the contours of the bottom. She who'd ruled these floodlands proudly for 100 seasons, ferocious, tenacious, rapacious, yes, she felt his presence in her realm, and knew a man from above was invading the below. She swam and seized him, but his body was swathed, boar helm, war shirt, and she couldn't peel the mail off to reveal his dread fate, nor impale him on fingernails. She dragged him through dregs instead. The sea-wolf slung the soldier out of the abyss and into her hall. He was too tightly held to wield his sword, no matter how he wished to war against her. As she swam, a shoal came seeking to school him, a scrimshaw selection of sea monsters, rising out of the dark, tunneling with tooth and tusk, spearing and jeering. Sharks, seals, squealing beasts boring through the bog, biting at his battle shirt. The warriors squinted in the shadows and made out the domed walls of the hall, damming back the damned waters. The mere made seer by engineering. He saw the glow of a fire, brilliant light flaming up and flaring, and then, at last, he saw her, the reclusive Night Queen, the mighty Mere Wife. Fearless, he heaved his sword to take her life, swinging with all his strength so the edge rang against her skull, but it was to no avail. His war torch was dimmed, his blood boldness gone. She was impervious to his blade. The sword had failed him, though it had served many worthy soldiers, skinned many adversaries, slicing armor, hacking helmets into hash. This was the first time the heirloom hadn't overwhelmed an enemy. Hygelac's heir was bent on blood, thinking of legacy, of legend. He hurled the sword, useless hoard guilt. Let it shatter in the silt. He'd fight like a man and take her hand to hand, his fingertips blueprinting her skin. This is what real men must do. Come on, we all know the truth. If you want to win, you have to forget you're afraid to die. The Geat was ready to rumble, pissed now. He roared a challenge, warmed for war with Grendel's mother, twisting her hair around his fist, raging, swinging her by her own skein, flinging her to crash against the kingdom she'd reigned over. She rose again, relentless, and turned on him, gripping and flipping him. The pugilist panicked. His certainty crumbling, he took flight and fell. He began, sick-hearted, to hear his death knell, his sure feet fumbling, his fight spirit fugitive. She bent over his breast, held the hall invader hard to the stones, and drew a long knife. The Mere Wife meant to avenge her son, her sole heir, but Beowulf's mail shielded him, his shoulders safe in the slerite of some smith's genius. Links staying locked to bend her blade. Edgtheow's heir would have been filleted, recategorized as MIA, and left to rot in her cavern, had not his suit saved him. That, too, was God's work. The Lord, maker of miracles, sky designer, had no trouble leveling the playing field when Beowulf beat the count and stood. He glimpsed it hanging in her hoard, that armory of heirlooms, somebody's birthright. A sword, blessed by blood and flood, ancient, dating from the dawn of things, so tremendous only a hero could heft it, though all would envy it. Beowulf gripped the giant's sword at the hilt, and then he, the Scyldings' main man, in desperation, not expecting to exist after this night, swung it at his enemy with all his might. It was enough. He cleaved her spine. Those bone rings given by God were bitten through, the house of her head raided, as her hall had been. She bent as though praying, and was spent, sinking to the stones. The sword sweated red. The swordsman regretted nothing. The light was strong now, a brilliance like flame and tallow meeting in a sky sick of sleep. And Beowulf took the volume of the vault, itemizing everything, his sword held high as defense against any other awfulness that sought him here. Higelac's hitman had more in mind. He sought to repay Grendel for his wrath, for every night he'd spent ravening, not just the first evening he'd come to Heorot, helping himself to 15 Danes and holding another 15 hostage, dragging them from home into horrors. Against the far wall our hero found Grendel, still as a sleeper, war-riven, a cadaver, cold and collapsed, heartless after his time in Heorot. Beowulf desecrated the dead, swinging the sword again and again, and rending the flesh, a heft, a wrench, removing Grendel's head. Above, Hrothgar's men surrounded the mere, holding the fort as best they could. Suddenly they saw the waters boil with blood, a roiling of gore, salt, and sorrow. They lowered silver heads. "Oh no," said the old men, tightly packed around their prince. That was a sad day. They wept for lost wishes, sure they'd never see Beowulf again, let alone witness him, in triumph, presenting his kill to their king. The sea-wolf had savaged him, everyone agreed, and it was lunchtime. The brave Scyldings forsook the cliff-top, and now their gold-giver home, but the visiting Geats, now vagrant, stayed, hopeless, heartsick, staring into the churning mere, yearning against all evidence for their lord to reappear. Below, in Beowulf's hands, the slaying sword began to melt like ice, just as the world thaws in May when the Father unlocks the shackles that have chained frost to the climate, and releases hostage heat, uses sway over seasons to uncage his prisoner, Spring, and let her stumble into the sun. The Geat's glory got nothing else from that estate, though he eyeballed the treasures Grendel's mother had collected. He only took head and hilt, jewel-scabbed savaged gilt. The blade itself had bled out, the inscriptions on it smeared to smut, so scathing was the blood of the slain stranger. It was done. The man who'd made it through alive, survivor of his enemy's annihilation, swam as fast as he could swim, undoing his dark dive. The mere ran clear and pure, now the ruler of the deep had unclasped her hand from ephemeral existence, letting loose her life. He surfaced at last, the hardy-hearted captain, swimming to shore, reveling in the heft of his hoard, the sea-chest he carried. Stunned, his men ran to meet him, thanking all that was holy. Oh, sorry. Thanking all that was holy, his loyal entourage rejoicing, shouting that he was risen, their lord, their leader, their all. They undressed him, freeing him of his armor, letting him breathe air instead of water. The mere was peaceful now, though battle-pinked, reflecting the cloudy sky above. Hearts singing with love, they returned from strangers' country by twisted trails, lapping the earth with strides onto known roads, safe roads. The boldest among them had carried Grendel's head, a hard task, heaving it onto the hearth from over sea cliffs. These men were major, massive, and committed. 4 brave warriors paired off to bear the gore hallward, a skull spitted on a spear litter. They approached HWÆT together, celebrating as they went. 14 ferocious, war-worked Geats trampling down the meadow, Beowulf among them, blending into his brothers, matching step for step. That leader of men entered the hall a hero, and made his way to Hrothgar, grit written. His crew dragged Grendel's head into the mead hall, where a meal was being served, and a host of lesser men ferried cups to mouths. In their midst was the queen of the house, their hoard, their treasure. The Danes stared, jaws dropped. Beowulf made a speech to end all speeches, that son of Ecgtheow. So we're back from the brink, Halfdane's son, Shielding's savior, bringing you this token of our esteem, sea booty, gore loot, no big whoop. Here's to glory, and now my story. I don't mean to say this shit was no thing. I lived through your basic fist fight underwater, a tryst with destruction. I did the deed you deemed necessary, but I'd be bluffing if I didn't say I would have died had God not kept me close. Though my sword seemed severe, I'd have been helpless had I had only Hrunting. Hardcore as it is, it failed when I brought it to battle. God gave me grace. He sometimes saves the solitary. On a ledge glowed another blade, marvelous enough to mend the mistake I'd made, trying to take on Grendel's mother in her own lair lake. Speed was my only advantage, solo as I was. I snatched the sword, striking down the bitch that sought to slay me, scoring the other one, too, her son. The blade blistered as it touched their blood, and rivers of red rushed over it, unforgiving from the fire fang. And rivers of red rushed over it, unforging it from the fire fang, into what you see here, a bladeless hilt. I brought it from below, having avenged the Dane's death. That's all I need to say, except that I promise you and every nobleman here, your sleep is safe now. Your corps can defend you, whether brave boys or bold men. You need not worry for their lives or longevity, Lord of Shieldings, nor fear anyone surging up from the mere. We're done with that damage. The hilt was handed off into the hard hands of the ring lord, a relic older than any ruler, rendered in iron by giants, and inherited, after enemies perished, by the Danish king. When the gruesome Grendel gave up the ghost, when God won over him and his mother, when that murderous pair was rendered moribund, it made sense that such a sweet piece, this smith-struck sword, would go to the prince, the loftiest lord between the salt seas, the guy who gave the greatest gifts on earth. Hrothgar considered his convictions. He handled the hilt, an ancient thing, a fossil from forgotten days, squinting at the legend left there for the literate. It was engraved with an epic inscrutable to him, the story of how war woke in the world, and a flood brewed, drowning the race of giants, placing them beneath the waves, a punishment for others, poor lord-lacking unbelievers, sin-soaked strangers, severed from sanctuary. On the golden guard the runes were written perfectly, the true name of the sword's first owner, long since Ash, for whom it had been forged, with its twisted hilt and serpent-slipped steel. There was silence until Halfdane's son spoke. A ruler who's been known as a good man ever since the days of old, a generous, just gift-giver, a war-wielding homeland healer, is equipped to say the following: This man's as good a man as me. Beowulf, my boy, you've proven yourself in every context. Your name will be known around the world. You're steady, strong, and sure in all respects. I open my arms to you as agreed, and fulfill the bonds of friendship. For your people you'll be, like me, a defender and hero. But, hold up, hear me out, indulge me a moment. Heremod, that old king, was no hopeful hero to the heirs of... Oh, jeez. How is that one pronounced? Edgevela, I think. I don't have that one listed. Sugar. What's the rule again? G's are soft unless they are... Yes, Edgevela. Edgevela, I think. We'll work with that. We'll work with that. Heremod. Heremod, that old king, was no hopeful hero to the heirs of Edgevela, the honor Scyldings. His rise was their fall. He raged, cut down close comrades, aged advisers, and when he died galled and alone, friendless though famous. God had given him grace, granted him wealth, health, and power. His road had no rocks on it. He'd known only joy. Somehow, though, his heart was not a hawk, but a drone. He bombed his own bases, denied his Danes damages, kept entrenched in combat. He commanded his kingdom's collapse, and was, when ancient, loathed when he could have been loved, his life lesioned with losses. Listen to me, boy. Keep your shit straight. I've been fostered by frost seasons, fathered by time, and I'm dropping knowledge now. Here's one of the world's wonders. God is good. He's given us gifts, the capacity for clarity granted our kind. He runs the show, though, manages every aspect of existence. Sometimes he gives a man from a good clan room to roam wherever he desires, every instant filled with joy, lets him run his own kingdom and rule over boys who guard his borders, stand-up guys who die for him. God does this for so many decades that the man himself, because men in the end are fools, forgets how things work. He shirks his soul-keeping. There'll be no changes for him, he thinks, no end in sight, no loss of love or life. He wallows like a bear in honey, unstung, and nothing scathes him, not sickness nor sorrow, nor does his mood darken, nor do his enemies find him, their blades sharp and stealthy. No, instead, the world wends to his will. He notices nothing nasty in himself until one day everything changes. Every guard goes down eventually. Sagging on the stone wall surrounding the soul. Here, while the sentry is sleeping, a sniper strikes, sending a spike into the man's heart. Now he's poisoned, selfishness searing his certainty. He's never needed to defend himself against internal threats, but the greedy orders of this beastly boss make him think that the halls he's guarded, the treasures he's watched over for decades, are nothing compared to what he deserves. He hoards, hisses, hides his gold, refuses support to those who've served him. He forgets his debts, fortune's amnesiac, blacking out bounty in favor of bitterness. Turn to the end of the story. I'll wait. His body weakens, fails, falls. An inheritor crawls into his throne and passes that king's heirlooms, his protected and precious things, to anyone he wishes to woo. No regard for the dead man's worth, rituals, or requirements. Armor yourself against that kind of idiocy, my brave boy, my Beowulf. Keep yourself on an even keel, aiming your ambition at eternity instead of the everyday. Don't let avarice override intelligence. It's only a season that a young soldier's strength stays a stalwart, before plague or blade bring obsolescence. A crackling blaze, a rush of waves, a slippery sword grip, a spear soaring silently through the air, or even the ague of age. Your gaze will darken too, boy. Your world will dim. Death will kneel over you eventually and solicit your surrender. Hear me now. I ruled the Ring-Danes for 50 years, fighting adversaries, holding borders, our spears and swords against assassins of every nation, until I thought my enemies were casualties, earth emptied of them. I relaxed into comfort and fortune, and just as we celebrated our conquering every kingdom, then came Grendel. He waited in the darkness, invaded my inner sanctum with savagery, broke my spirit, and drove me into a dark depression. Thank God, thank all that is holy, I lived long enough to see you bring me Grendel's head, sword split after years of struggle. Now I can look upon it, crow, and count him a corpse. Oh, but I've gone on too long. Sit down, golden boy, heir of this hall. Feast. There'll be more rewards in the morning from my hands to yours. Probably one of the best Caesar, thou art remember Caesar, thou art mortal speeches ever. It's a pretty good one. Beowulf grinned and took his assigned seat, set by his elder king. A bench bedecked in Beowulf. Then the Danes and Geats got down to business. The celebration began in earnest. The room was filled, and a banquet bowed the tables. Night hooded the hall and wrapped all who celebrated in starry dark. At last the companions rose, their elder was ebbing, and called for sleep. The Geat followed suit, weary after warfare, heartsick for home, accompanied by a hall officer who led him from the company, there to tend to every desire, a butler of burdens, bleaching away bloodshed and battle, packing off pain. It was no more than Beowulf deserved. He dove into dreams, as above him the hall stretched toward heaven, its gilt and vaulted ceilings shielding the hero's heart. At dawn a black raven called out the melody of morning, the happiness of inhabiting the heavens. Sunlight snatched shadows from corners, and wayward warriors readied themselves for removal, hungering for home. Their leader was up at once, looking into the distance, his soul seeking his ship. The fierce fighter called for Hrunting to be brought, and bade Unferth receive it, with thanks for the loan. He complimented its blade, and said it had been a friend to him, powerful in battle. He mentioned nothing about the dullness of the edge. He had no urge to nurture a grudge. Now the warriors were ready to roll, armor on, hearts set on home. Their prince approached the dais where the king awaited, and knelt at Hrothgar's feet, confident and canny. Ah, geez, one sec. Beowulf, Ecgtheow's own, said the proper words. It's time for us who set sail to save this king's land to tell you we're overdue to return to our own man, Hela. At Heorot we've been held as kin, hosted, kept comfortable, and if there's anything more I can do for you beyond the battles I've won, any more of your heart I can win by warring, demand it. Your wish is my command. If I ever hear a whisper over the whale road that your walls are wobbling, that neighbors are invading, that enemies are afoot, as enemies are wont to be, I'll appear with a horde of thousands, and bring them to bear. Higelac may not be gray like you, he may seem young to rule, but know this, he has my back. He'll heed my call if you need help, and bring speech and sword to support me, assisting you with any needs as you would me. your new son. I'll bring a spear forest, a ferocious force, should you need fighters. And if your son Hrethric should come to foster in Geatland, a Dane king's voyager in Hygelac's court, he'll find friends there. Foreign shores share their secrets with those who are themselves worthy. Overcome, Hrothgar answered him. The Lord all-knowing put words in your mouth, Beowulf, words of love. I've never heard a boy, a man, manage such diplomacy, such propriety so easily. Your body's made of steel, your mind mercury, your tongue gold, and if Hrethel's son should, I'm not saying he will, die in battle, a sword, spear, or sickness slaying that princely protector of your kind, and you remain alive, I'm certain, with all I know, that the Geats would never find a better man to be their well-won king and protector, if you should want that level of lordship, that intense responsibility. I like you more every moment, Beowulf. You've bonded two tribes. The Danes and the Geats are peace-woven now, despite our harrowing history. We fought fiercely in the past, but now we're friends forever. As long as I'm king of this remote place, my treasury will spill into your coffers, all that's mine on offer, from sea to shining sea. All the ships that cross will carry gifts to you. I know now what I did not before. Your people are like my people, perfect and prized, defenders of the good against the god-awful. The Dane's defender dropped gold in the hand of the Geat's glory, 12 treasures more given in health and wealth. 12 treasures more given in health and wealth, and bid him take himself to shore now, but come back any time. The old king had run out of ceremonies. He kissed his new best boy, his adopted kin, throwing his arms about his neck and weeping. Two premonitions overtook him, shaking him to the core, the stronger one that they'd never meet again. Beowulf was so dear to him he couldn't stop trembling, but in his heart and mind's eye he foresaw that keeping this Saviour's son nearby could only end in flame. He opened his arms. He let him go. Beowulf went forth, a golden warrior striding across green grasses. While peering off cliffs, he tallied his rewards. His ship waited impatiently on him, tugging at her anchor. All the gifts given by Hrothgar would be weighed as they went on. That was a good king, his men agreed, perfect in every way, until time, robber of vaults, stole his strength and swapped it for softness. Down they marched to the shore, bright boys reveling in metal dress and battle gains, stamping in glee. The land watch took note of them from afar, as he had at their arrival, this time without rancor. He raised his hand and rode in greeting, arriving as they boarded their vessel, gifts glinting in sunlight. He announced to the assembled that the departing heroes would surely be celebrated in Geatland. They pulled the ship to sand, and filled it with a king's ransom. Gems and gold, horses and armor, the mast marking the spot of their treasure. They hefted Hrothgar's heirlooms whole cloth into the hold, gifting even the coast guard a sword, gold-wrapped and gorgeous, so that later he'd be able to flash it while drinking, and say he'd been there when. They shoved the ship from the spit, keel splashing into salt, Denmark soon distant. Sails whipped about her mast, a veil for her sea gaze. Ropes tautened and timbers moaned. Winds surged to skip the vessel like a smooth stone across the ocean, white with foam, lifted by light, until at last the cry was heard, the cliffs of Geatland grown visible, counted, claimed, and the ship sang out for the final push, thrusting herself at the shore, shoving keel at country. Their harbor watcher was already running, waiting as he'd been for days, eyes peeled for the return of his tribe. He tugged anchor cables, moored the ship to sand, heaving her against the current to keep the waves from seducing her again. He ordered that the holds be emptied, gold and gems, all stores and hoards, straight to shore. After that it was only a hop skip to Hygelac, Hrethel's heir, and the gold would go his way, up the cliff to king and company. The building was brilliant, the king imposing, enthroned in his home hall. I'm not sure how this is pronounced. I think it's Hyd, based on the other pronunciations. I might be wrong. Hyd, his queen, was young but shrewd. It's Hygd. It's not Hygd, because that breaks the rules. The other name we have that we've already done is Hygelac, and that's pronounced that way. That's Hygelac. So I'm going to assume it's Hyd. Hyd, his queen, was young but shrewd. Though she'd only overwintered recently in the realm. Hareth? Hareth? There's another one. Yeah, it's got to be Hareth. Let's go with that. Sorry. I looked over my list before doing this and then forgot all of them by the time I actually got to anything that I need to remember. And this is like names the section. This is like all character person references. A lot of them are one-offs, so I'm not going to worry too much about it. Hyd, his queen, was young but shrewd. Though she'd only overwintered recently in the realm, Hareth's daughter knew her duty. Open heart met open hands when it came to Geats. She paid attention, made trenchant thrift feel more generous than lessers over gifts. Nothing like Modthrith. Oh shit, remember her? The people's princess, an utter criminal. Bro, if anyone even looked at her in daylight, save her own overlord, she'd deal that man death. Order him bound, each shackle tightened to torture, his sentence resounding from on high. Sword selection. Then the entertainment, a public flaying, arteries spurting. Gore, good riddance. She may have been beautiful, she may have been royal, but can we agree here? Why the brutality? Petty peace weavers aren't meant to claw, bringing good men down just for looking innocent oglers sent deathward. Oh, there's a comma. Bringing good men down just for looking, innocent oglers sent deathward. Talk about inflated offenses. Right. Then Hemming's son became Modthrith's husband, and she shifted mysteriously. Drinkers spilt a different song, a bathroom wall graffiti shrift. Marriage mellowed the monster. She sea-changed when she was Uffa's wife. Everyone liked her better. Her father had traded her, hauled her onto a ship, dowry-gowned, conveyed her from her homeland to other shores. Her nature changed when she got free of her family. She became queenly. Before, she'd been the worst. She sat on her new throne, famed for kindness, loyalty, devotion to her king. And him? Bro, obviously he was the best, a king among kings, and moreover, the greatest man who ever lived, if that's not overkill, so it's no wonder she learned morals under his hand. Uffa's honored wife, as he ruled over his lands, from that duo, as proof, if needed, came a good son, Eomer, grandson of Garmund, Hemming's kinsman, well met to all warriors, reliable in combat, and keeper of comrades. Back to Beowulf, a hero himself, marching with his men across the sand, crossing the sprawling strand, the tidal flats and salted shores, making haste beneath brightness as the sky candle shone hard from the south. They hurried blur fast overland to where, rumor had it, their youthful king, killer of Ongentheow, protector of his own clans, was handing out booty in his honored hall. That Beowulf was back that Beowulf was back was shouted man to man, so Hygelac knew it, even as his warrior made his way through the gates and into the hall, war-kin to the king and killer captain, well and willing. The hall was cleared, and the king awaiting, as our boy and his horde marched in. Hygelac greeted his warrior in formal speech, then sat down head to head with him, ready to compare notes with his returning boatman brother. Hareth's daughter wafted wifely through the hall, mead jug in her hands, caring for the companions, pouring a waterfall into cups as warriors held them high. Only then did Hygelac begin to question his comrade, calmly, commandingly, to glean the story of the war Geats, and take the tale for his own hall history.
Holy hell, Beowulf, how'd it go out there? You left with hardly a word, and hied yourself over water to defend a hall not your home. Heorot. And Hrothgar, did you help him? We know his woes, and to be honest, I thought them insoluble. I've been mourning you in advance, dreading news of your death. As you may recall, I begged you to let the Danes do their own damn dirty work. It's them who began a blood feud with Grendel, and them who should end it. Well, thank God you're home, whatever horror happened at Heorot.
Beowulf, descendant of Ecgtheow, began. I'm surprised you haven't heard what went down, Hygelac. It was proud, already written into poems. Grendel and I slammed each other in the very hall he'd been harrowing, murdering metal Scyldings, ripping hearts from their holds, all of which, not to jump ahead, he got whipped into eternity for. Grendel will never have a single son to brag on his daddy's battles, to tell the tale of our night fight, no matter whether any of his awful line managed to live through a shifting civilization. Let me lay it out now. When I got to Denmark, I sped to Hrothgar's hall and presented myself, giving cred and clan. Once he knew who I was and what I'd come to do, he stationed me on a bench between his own sons and threw a raucous feast for me. I've never seen any company drunker or more delighted. More mead, men! The queen herself came through, that pretty peace pleader, and gave out gifts to bolster courage. A war torque for this warrior, before she snuggled up beside the king. Hrothgar's daughter, too, made the rounds, bringing beer to the highest rank, all plank arranged. Freawaru, they called, and she circled the room, offering up a studded cup. That bangle-bedecked beauty is betrothed to Froda's bereaved son, Ingeld. The Scyldings' king chose him for her husband, Hrothgar hoping, kingdom keeper that he is, that sending his precious daughter to fuck his foe's son will fix the fatherly feud, heal bitter hearts, and bandage weeping wounds. But spears seldom sleep for long when a ruler's fallen, no matter how perfect the princess. We can predict how the Heothobards will react, every loyal thane there. All will go well until after the wedding, when the young lord starts to dance and dips his Danish bride, her body dripping in a dark dowry, ancient garnets bought in blood from the Heothobards themselves, sparkling stones stripped from their beloved ghosts, ringmail wrought by their own ancestors, cherished heirlooms returning home as Danish dazzle, uncredited. An aged uncle, already drunk, swaying, will shout, "Let's have a toast!" His eyes will focus on rings well known to him, triggering black thoughts of massacre, all that killing, all those spirits suddenly filling the hall. Heart pounding, he'll sound the sorrows of his people, begin to prick to the prince's conscience, seeking to stir him. To our host, and to the sword his father carried in his final battle. Don't tell me you don't recognize the prime iron he died swinging. The day he fought the Danes, let me refresh your memory, boy. The day Withergild was murdered. The day Witherhild was murdered and our heroes fell to folly, the day the Scyldings shook the field down, scavenging our dead. Now who wears your father's armor? Some assassin's son,
walking into our home hall, shaking sword and status, boasting that he owns us, weighted with the wonders you should yourself be wearing. He won't stop, but will keep pressing, raising the temperature of the room, until one of the Danish ladies' thanes is slain, streaked with crimson, killed for Danish deeds, his slayer sprinting out alive into home territory. This will begin it all again. Both sides, vow bound, will break, old thirsts unslaked, a rage rising in Ingeld, his love for Freawaru frozen, comforts gone to curses. That's all just to say, sidebar, that the Heothabards aren't to be trusted, their faltering friendship with the Danes bridged only by a bride. Now, my main man, let me get back to Grendel, the story of our clash and crash, everything that happened when we two went hand to hand. After Heaven's gem slipped smoothly down to soil, he arrived, that froth-fanged foulness, that twilight tormentor, come to attack us as we gathered in silent safety in Heorot. There, Hansheo was fated to fall, torn from his light, first cursed on this quest. Our beloved brother was beaten and eaten, his gory grave Grendel's gullet. Let me be clear, Grendel ate him up. The attacker's teeth were bloody, his face strewn with gobbets, his body swollen with evil, and still he wasn't finished feasting, but insisted on leaving the golden hall with more harvest. Grendel was famous for his heft. He extended hands then for none other than your boy. He had a huge sack hanging from his shoulder, stitched with sinew, clasped with clever workings, crafted of twisted dragon skins. Grendel knew nothing of us, but this wrath wanderer wanted to stuff Beowulf and his boys into that sack. Abduct us. That shit wasn't happening. The moment I stood to face him, my rage evident, Grendel was a goner. I'd be talking too long if I got into every detail of the battle, how I paid him in pain for wrongs done to Danes. Suffice it to say, I won you honor, my king, and the Geats as well. Even though Grendel got loose and lived, suckling at survival's sweetness a little longer, his right arm stayed in Heorot, holding the door, amputated, and he limped, anguished, to the mere, where he dove and drowned in despair. The Dane lord rewarded me for my life risking with piles of gold and heaps of heirlooms, once the sun was up. All of us at table, primed for entertainment, singers and story slingers. An ancient Scylding, steeped in the history of his people, told tales of the early days. Sometimes one of the men touched harp strings, recounting his life story, and other times the king himself offered up an awesome riff, while in turn the grimmest among us, scarred and wizened, would hobble up to tell of boyhood battles, then shift to songs of old age, overcome by emotion, silvered heart aching for the good old golden days. We reveled indoors for hours, joyful and united, until nightfall came stalking us, a shadowy reaper. Uninvited, she appeared, a dame made of damage. Grendel's mother slinking out of the dark, formatted for fury, avenging her son and bringing ruin back to the room. Grief and death theft had possessed her, and she came to find the Geats who'd found her Grendel. She marched for blood, a rebel warrior entering private premises, and captured a counselor. Ashara. Ashara. I frigged that up. Ashera. There we go. Pronounce the H. Sorry. And captured a counselor, Ashera, the king's closest and wisest. In the morning there was no body to burn, no corpse, nothing at all to call back his memory in smoke, nor limbs to light for love. She'd borne his flesh away and hidden it in the darkness under the mountain and rushing waters, her mere morgue. Hrothgar was broken by this blow, worse than any other, his scars reopened by razors. The king begged me, yes, begged, and he named you, too, to go after her, to pursue her under water, to avenge his loss, and if I did it, to gain even greater glory. He named his price, and it was done.
Into icy waters I went, diving deep to meet my match, and found her, raging. I took her, and she took me too, hand to hand, woman to man, water roaring red, splitting the current with color, until at last, in her own hall, I beheaded Grendel's mother with a sword too substantial for anyone else's swing. I barely left with my life, and only that by fate's choice. But when I returned to the surface, Halfdane's heir, bearer of men, gave me a stocked store of his own hoard, gifts golden and godly. Thus Hrothgar acted as ever he has, paying me for my sacrifice and more, letting me set my wages in goblets and goods. From Hrothgar's heirlooms comes Hygelac's inheritance. I have brought these gifts to you, your majesty, and I give 'em willingly. You're the man I seek to impress. I've got no other family left, none so close. Your kindness is my comfort. Beowulf called for the boar's head standard, the battle-crested helmet, the grizzled grey mail shirt, and the ferocious war sword, and wrought an account of their provenance. When Hrothgar gave me all these precious things, brilliant leader, he bade me bring you words as well, to explain why their favors fit for kings. He told me this had belonged to his older brother, King Hrothgar, but he'd kept it locked away, and never giving it over to inheritance, not even to his son Heoroweard, despite his worthiness, despite his loyalty. Now it's yours to bear in health. Bro, here's what I know. 4 horses were brought in next, presented to the king. Beowulf bestowed those bays, along with their armor, each one an impossible gift of blood and girth. This is how it should be between birth kin. No plots, no plans for plunder, no conspirers crafting catastrophe, no one sculpting death where life should be. The warrior king, Beowulf's uncle, was lucky to have the loyalty of his nephew, and he carried Beowulf's burdens in return. I heard Beowulf brought Hyd the golden torque gifted him by Wealhtheow, and with it 3 horses harnessed similarly in gold, sleek and graceful. The queen wore her reins well, her breast radiant with heroic history. Thus did Beowulf bring his bravery to bear. He'd battled like a brawler, but could hold court with kings and queens too, never punching down, never mocking drunk comrades, never locking himself in combat with those whose strength couldn't stand. He kept his stones controlled, and when he rolled only with equals. Mind, he hadn't had this status when he left, a boy who men looked on as low. The Geats thought him lazy, and even their lord had never given him span on the beer bench, believing he was all bluster, no badass, thinking his position came from privilege, not class. But now, everyone who'd thought Beowulf was just a wayward boy got taught. The king, war-bringer, protector of men, ordered Hrethel's heirloom brought in, and that splendid sword, gem-clotted, the best by far in the treasury, he lay in Beowulf's lap. Then more. He gave his man 7,000 hides of land, and a hall of his own, into which he could place his throne. They both already had land from their fathers, ancestral sway, but now a better way. Land came from Hygelac to his new right-hand man, Beowulf. And with that, I'm going to call it for today. Next week, we'll wrap it up. So now we get into, I guess you'd call it a time skip. There's another, I want to say there's another digression as well. But then we have like kind of the after story stuff as well. So we'll do that next week, as well as Maria Dahvana Headley's introduction, which is going to be about as long a segment. So next week will be a longer one than this week. This week was really short, actually quite a bit shorter than I would have liked. Let me see if there's a little more I can. Nah, it's a pretty excellent stopping point. Because otherwise I'm kind of bopping it in the middle of an arc, if you will. So we'll just do that. So this week's short. Next week will be longer. I'm glad you're enjoying Ufink. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Thanks for tuning in. Hopefully you're enjoying. You sound like you are. That's excellent. Um, I can't guarantee that I'm going to get around to one of the other translations of Beowulf I have lying around, like the Heaney or Tolkien ones that I have. I won't guarantee that, but I might do it if for some reason I'm like, oh, you know what I want to do? Another Beowulf translation, just so you have a point of comparison. I don't know that I would say that this is my favorite translation of Beowulf. I think as a modern translation goes, it's entertaining. Um, and it's got its own angle. It feels unique enough to stand on its own. Um, I know a lot of people do not like that HWÆT is translated as bro. Um, there's people who've gotten, I feel, unreasonably upset at that. Um, and there is definitely some modern terminology used that I think is not going to age particularly well. I think bro is the least of its worries. um, there's a bit early on where it says hashtag blessed, and that one does kind of rankle a little. But I'm reading it because yeah, it takes one out of one's comfort zone, and it's entertaining. So yeah, to anyone wondering why these are so rough, it's because I do them live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, starting at 12 noon Eastern Time or UTC -5. So whatever time zone you're in, you can calculate accordingly. Um, Usually I go 2 hours. This week was shorter. Uh, right now on Mondays, I'm reading through Armor by John Stakely. Wednesdays, right now, we're going through Beowulf, a new translation by Maria Dahvana Headley. And then on Fridays, we're going through Destination Void by one Frank Herbert, um, which is kind of warm up for the, what is it called? The Pandora sequence, which is the Jesus incident, uh, the Lazarus effect, and the ascension factor. We will be trading off volumes between that trilogy and another trilogy, the Three Body Problem trilogy by Cixin Liu, whose name and many other character names I will likely be mispronouncing at every turn. Um, Chinese is not my first language, or my second, or my 600th. It is not really in my repertoire. So we're going to be faking that for the most part. After we get done Armor, I'm probably going to be doing All You Need Is Kill by Japanese author whose name I can't remember off the top of my head, which is embarrassing. I can't quite see the spine from where I'm sitting. It's just I can't see it from here. Anyway, um, and on Wednesday, after we get through Beowulf, I plan on doing a short book called Termouche, which is interesting. I hope people will enjoy. Yeah, that's it. So that's the foreseeable future. I am going to be gone the first 2 weeks of August. Um, I should be back the week of the 11th, but I'm not absolutely positive. I might be back the week of the 11th. If I'm not, I'm not. Um, so it might just be 1 week that I'm gone, but we'll find out. Kind of, it's schedule portion that's up in the air. Um, I will not be around. At any rate, thanks to those who tuned in. If you're listening to this after the fact, hi. Hope you enjoy. I do have these organized in playlists. Usually I'm about a month behind. Um, I usually, or rather, I should say, I update the playlists every month. to make sure everything that I've done in the intervening month is put into its proper playlist. Ordinarily, this wouldn't be a problem, but sometimes when I'm doing 3 different book streams a week, that means it piles up pretty quickly, and I have to go through it and be like, wait a minute, where does this one go? Oh no! If anybody going through the playlists finds something that is wrong, like the order or something is incorrect, do not hesitate to mention it, and I will get it fixed. Um, yep, that's about it. Sorry for the short one. I was expecting this to be longer, but it wound up going quite quickly. Um, but yeah, thanks for tuning in. Stay safe, stay sane, be toasty or cool as your geolocation and preferences permit, and be decent to each other. See you all next time.